You know, this summer's been a pretty crazy time for One Piece fans. Gear 5th just got adapted in the anime and it looks at its best just about as good as people had hoped. The manga is popping off with some crazy chapters, dropping mind-shattering revelations once every leap year whenever they happen to drop. And now another thing we can tack onto that list is the One Piece live action, which I gotta be honest, I was not expecting to even be saying this, but it turned out to actually be pretty damn good. I liked it a lot, and it's not without its criticisms, of course. I'm gonna be covering all of that today, but basically the purpose of this video is going to be a top to bottom review of the One Piece live action. I'm going to be going over everything from the visuals to the acting, to the cinematography, to the soundtrack, to the story, the writing itself. You know, how did the story pan out over the course of these 8 episodes? So without further ado, let's just get right into it. We're going to go through all the elements of the show one at a time, and each one that I go through, we're going to cover both the positives and negatives. So I'll do the positives first, the negatives second. Cool? Cool. Well, let's start with the characters and how they look and feel as characters, right? The Straw Hats, I think, are perfect. All the costume designs are great. I love their wardrobe. I like how they switch between clothing very, very often. It feels a lot like the manga where they change clothing every arc. But in this case, it really feels like they're changing their clothes day to day like regular people. And a lot of these costumes either come from the manga directly or from color spreads in the manga, which I think is really cool. And I'm pretty sure Artur, the Library of Ohara, had a lot to do with some of these like little Easter eggs and finer details that came from the manga. He did supply them with some of that information. So thank you for that. It did make the world feel that much more detailed and real, and there's some outfits that really stuck out to me as memorable, like Usopp in that pirate's outfit with the sunglasses in Baratie. I thought that was hilarious. Luffy with his Hawaiian style shirt that he was wearing in Syrup Village, I thought that was really cool too. There's a lot of nice outfits in the show that look great, and they didn't compromise too hard on the cartoony style of the manga and the realistic style of the live action. They kind of met in the middle and embraced the look of the One Piece manga, especially when it comes to non-Straw Hat characters. One of the biggest worries I had was, are they going to tone down the designs of some of the more ridiculous characters in the story? We're definitely going to be seeing a lot more crazy designs post Grand Line. But East Blue does have its share of wacky characters. I would say the Nyaban brothers in Syrup Village, Captain Kuro. You know, Kuro had those like golden poops on his butler jacket. I was worried that they were going to kind of tone all the, you know, weird factor down for the character designs. But no, they stuck with it, like, completely. Every villain and every character, for the most part, looks as they should, almost one-to-one with the manga in terms of costume design. Now, we can talk about casting. I would say the casting is mostly on point, and the only issues I really have with the casting is not in appearance, but in terms of acting. The only appearance-based casting I would say I have an issue with is Ben Beckman, but that's no surprise because the entire internet's been roasting the Ben Beckman actor. I'm gonna be honest, take it easy on the guy, okay? He didn't choose to be cast. It was the casting director that picked him. Blame that guy for picking this dude for Ben Beckman. And the only other casting I kind of felt a little bit meh about is Arlong. I feel like Arlong maybe is a little bit too small, or they made him look a little too small for his character, and I didn't really like the gravelly Dark Knight, like Batman type voice that he was doing in a bunch of scenes. It just felt a little bit stiff. I'm a very, very big fan of Kobe, Helmeppo, and Buggy, actually. I think all of them actually added to their characters a little bit. Kobe's actor is really doing a great job with, you know, what he's being given. I think at times maybe he acts a little bit too timid, where it feels forced and not a natural consequence of his character. But Helmeppo feels like he came right off the page. Like, this dude is Helmeppo. I think he did it perfectly. I love his introduction. I love how he's handled in episode 1. I think his delivery is hilarious. His haircut looks great once Zoro gives him the haircut. So yeah, I think Helmeppo's character came out great, and I'm really glad that they gave him more of an active focus in the show, but we'll get to that later when we get to the writing. Luffy as a protag, okay? I guess this is the time to talk about that. Luffy, I think, is actually pretty amazing. I'm surprised at how Iñaki was able to pull off a shonen protagonist without it being mega cringe. That was like a big worry of mine, was that, you know, Luffy is a great character for manga, he's a great character in that format. Translating that into live action with real people can be jarring, and I thought that was going to be the case, but no, he captured the character perfectly, I feel like. There's a lot of scenes where there's like a joke based on Luffy's personality, him either being gullible, not understanding sarcasm, or just being outright dumb, and I think those jokes landed perfectly. They felt like they came right out of the manga despite being originally written for the show. I know a lot of worries that people had were that the show was going to be very Marvel quippy and it was going to have a lot of like one-liners like, ooh, well that just happened. But no, you know, the whole I'm sensing tension amongst the crew line, it felt like a Marvel line in the trailer, but when you have these things in the full context of the show, they didn't really come off that way. They didn't come off as corny. I really think that they landed. The jokes landed and they did what they were supposed to do. The show felt very lighthearted as a result, and I think that the acting of the main cast played a large part in that. The Straw Hats as a whole have a great dynamic together. The way they interact, the way they banter, the way they joke, it really felt like a group of friends on this adventure, and I love to see this slow progression towards the crew form over the season. Like at the beginning, they're all very dismissive of each other. They don't really seem to like each other, I guess, aside from Luffy, but over the course of the season, you see them slowly develop this friendship. There's a bunch of scenes where it really feels like they're connecting and bonding as a crew and bonding as friends, and you can see that progression form by the end of the season. It really feels satisfying to watch them grow as a crew. The sets and the locations look nice. Overall, the actual scenery of the show looked great, and when they needed to have those set pieces work, they made them work. The Baratier felt like the Baratier. I really like how the scenery is very unique to each island. You know, if you go from Orange Town to Syrup Village, both of them are kind of like grassy rural towns or villages or whatever in the manga, but in the anime, they changed the location of both of those arcs to be somewhere completely unique. So instead of just fighting Buggy in the streets of a town, they're fighting Buggy in a circus tent. Instead of fighting Kuro on a random hill outside of town, they're fighting him inside the mansion. So all these set pieces felt very unique and they felt real and lived in, and I really like that about the world, because despite how crazy the world of One Piece is, they managed to make it feel legit. And I think that's only going to get better in the later seasons. I think the ships look great in general. Like most of the ships look pretty much perfect, I would say. I really like Garp's ship. I thought Alvida's ship came out great. I wish we could have seen more of Buggy's ship. We didn't really get a good look at that at all. I wish it was like in the dock or something that we could, you know, get a look at it, but oh well. But most importantly, the Going Merry is great. I mean, once you see them like moving throughout the ship, going into the rooms in the ship, and once you see the tangerine trees in the back, and you get the full shot of it with the Straw Hat Jolly Roger on the flag, and they're just blowing through the ocean waters and setting off on their adventure, it really feels like the Going Merry. I loved it. I really did. So I gotta say, if you could ignore, I know a lot of people were picking on the figurehead, but if you can ignore that, it looks like the Going Merry. They did their job there. Another thing I really liked is the fight scenes. A lot of the fight scenes felt fun and action-packed, and the movement and the choreography felt great. Like, I can think of a few off the top of my head. Zoro and Sanji in Arlong Park, Usopp versus Chu, Luffy versus Arlong. Like, all the fight scenes actually felt really good. Even Buggy with the Chop Chop fruit, you know, fighting with Luffy and all the parts orbiting around Luffy in the room, it was really fun to watch. I think the fight scenes were some of the best parts of the show. One fight scene that comes to mind that was an addition is they actually show the fight of Zoro versus Mr. Seven. And I guess this is more of a story thing, and we see him legit just chop a guy in half right there on the screen. And this is actually taken from the manga, believe it or not, in Whiskey Peak. When they're first talking to Zoro about how they offered him to join Baroque Works one time, they mention how the original Mr. Seven was killed by Zoro when he went to offer him a position in Baroque Works. So what the live action did is they actually adapted that into a scene, and that served as the first time we see Zoro doing his thing. We actually see the pirate hunter at work here, and I thought that was really cool. I think the spirit of fights in One Piece was for the most part captured. There's some things I didn't like, and we'll get to that later. There's a little bit of a campy factor to all this that I think they really embraced rather than rejected. And this is a thing that happens in a lot of live action anime adaptations, where they think that because we're going to live action, that means we need to make the show super gritty and realistic and dark, and we need to take any cartoonish things and kind of turn them into a real world equivalent to make it work, right? Because a lot of times the immediate immediate assumption is that most cartoons or anime don't translate well into live action, so we have to make it realistic to make it work. But they didn't do that here. They knew from the get-go that One Piece is not realistic. It's never going to be realistic. It's such a ridiculous story filled with all these insane characters and weird powers and fantastical locations that there would have been really no way to make it realistic, quote unquote. And I think that that would have been a bad move. If they had gone that route and tried to gridify One Piece, I think it would have ruined the entire show. The fact that they embraced it and then really put all their weight into Oda's storytelling, and they kept the visuals and the aesthetic and the tone and the feel of his world without compromising much, I think was a really great decision on their part, and it made for a better show in the end, because that's really what an adaptation should be. It should try and translate what was good about the original source material into a live action format. And to cap off the visual section, one really nice little detail I liked was the title cards. I really like how every episode had a different title card featuring like a different Jolly Roger, or whoever was the focus of the episode would get their Jolly Roger featured on the title card. And it was pretty exciting every episode to see what the title card was going to be next. I like that a lot. I actually prefer it to making like a full 1 to 2 minute opening for the show, like Game of Thrones or something. I actually prefer that it's just a title card drop and we're straight into the episode. Now let's talk about some of the negatives in the visual and acting department. One that stuck out to me, at least regarding the characterization or performance of the character, was Garp. I really like the actor for Garp. I think he did a great job. He's a very good actor. I think our live action Garp makes for a great, serious Marine, like a commander type Marine. But he doesn't really do a great job at capturing the sillier side to Garp. You know, like the side that we kind of connect to Luffy. You know how everyone says Garp is just like a big Luffy, or Luffy is just like a mini Garp, or vice versa, or whatever. I don't feel like that was captured properly in the show. I don't feel like that came across as it should have. And I don't know if that's because of the actor or if that's because of the writing or what, but I do think his performance was good for what it was. I just wish that Garp's character was more Garp. You know, I don't know how else to explain it, but another one is Luffy. I know I was singing his praises before, but I do have a couple of nitpicks with Luffy's performance. I think his delivery is great like 95% of the time, but then 5% of the time we have this kind of awkward or jarring delivery. I think a big example of this would be right at the beginning of the show when Luffy's having the conversation with the news crew and he's speaking in a perfectly normal tone of voice, and then he suddenly explodes into screaming, "I'm gonna be king of the pirates." To me, that felt like it was a forced scream. It felt like he was screaming because the script told him to, and not because he was genuinely excited or because he was genuinely energized about being king of the pirates or something. It didn't really feel like a natural shout. It felt like, okay, the script wants me to shout here, I'm going to shout. And Luffy goes from perfectly normal tone of voice to shrill scream in the matter of like 2 seconds.
Find the One Piece and become king of the pirates!
So don't get me wrong, I think Inyaki's performance is great as Luffy. I think he captures the spirit of Luffy very well. The problem I think he has is he's not very good at capturing the hyper aspects of Luffy, where Luffy acts like, you know, kind of like a loud kid, where he's like a loudmouth shouting, screaming his gold to the world, being this super energetic, like pumped up guy. I feel like the humor, the seriousness, the friendliness of his character is perfect. He really, really nailed it with Luffy there. But I think in terms of the energetic or the hyper elements of Luffy's personality, he's not comfortable quite yet with capturing that without it feeling forced or stilted. Certain CGI'd moments in the show look pretty rough, to be honest. I think the gum fruit stretching looks great sometimes, and other times it just looks terrible. Like, you can see the way the skin texture or whatever is being stretched and skewed on screen, and it doesn't look natural. It looks very uncanny valley to me. It's a mixed bag. I don't really think this is a huge negative. I just think it's something that you kind of have to suspend your disbelief with, or kind of ignore as you're watching the show. But the CGI looks great sometimes and pretty bad other times, and the worst example of this is in Sanji's flashback, in my opinion. They end this emotional, heartbreaking flashback with this one wide shot of Sanji standing in front of Zeph on the rock, and it's so obvious that Sanji is photoshopped in. I can't tell if it's the lighting or if it's the shadows, but he looks like he's floating and he's like green screened into the scene. and it's so obvious. It looks like it was something that was like made on YouTube or something, that it just pulled me completely out of the emotional height. I'm gonna be honest, it made me laugh. When I'm watching Sanji's flashback and he's witnessing Zeph sacrificing a limb, eating his own leg to keep Sanji alive, and Sanji's crying, he's sitting there in front of his hero and crying, and then you make me laugh. If I go from heartbroken to laughter in the span of like 2 seconds, I think that the delivery there needs some work. And that, I would say that's the worst example of the CGI actually harming or impacting the story. I would say that's pretty much the only one. There's obviously a couple other things here and there, like Zoro did a roll in one scene, I think in the beginning of the show, and you can see the Wado Ichimonji bend in half if you're like paying attention. Also not a deal breaker, not the end of the world, but worth mentioning. But I think for me, the biggest issue I have with the One Piece live action in terms of the visual department is the cinematography. There's a lot of really up close shots that are like pressed up against the actors' faces, and I get that it's done for stylistic and budgetary reasons, but I just don't think it works here. I gotta be honest, some of them are pretty nauseating, especially when they use this fisheye lens effect. You can see this a lot at the beginning of episode 3, but it's all throughout the show that they use this lens, and it feels like the show is very claustrophobic and closed in as a result, because you have this world that's supposed to be big, wide, open, and free, and you have all these shots that box the characters into these really uptight, close angles, like right up here. Like this. This is the One Piece angle. Ready? Hey, Luffy, are we gonna go fight Arlong? Yeah, I think so. And they're used for most of the dialogue exchanges, and a lot of characters talk in One Piece, so a lot of the time we're going to be looking at these really up close, almost uncomfortable camera angles of the characters. It makes the world feel a lot smaller to me. If you want to show the scope of the One Piece world and how big and beautiful and vast it is, you kind of have to show a little bit more of the scenery that they're in. Do more landscape shots, do more wide shots. I know that that's not the best budgetary option, but for example, they were on the set at Syrup Village, they were at Kaya's mansion. They had a whole mansion and estate that they could film in, and most of it is shot indoors in hallways. They could have had a couple of scenes showing them walking around the courtyard or the garden of the mansion and do these wider shots. They used miniatures for some parts of the show, but it really feels like it was like such a minor thing. They only used miniatures for like, what, 20 to 30 seconds of the entire show? These up-close camera angles aren't really doing it for me. It feels like they're trying to make a statement with every dialogue exchange, with every shot, and I just don't think it works. It really makes the show feel claustrophobic when we should be getting these wide, bigger shots that show the scale of the world relative to the characters in it. I think that's a really good way to communicate the scope of the One Piece world, and they need to do that once they get to the Grand Line. I don't think the Grand Line should feel small, and they can't let it feel small. And yeah, no more of that fisheye lens thing, please. Can we just not do that anymore? The worst example I can find of this is Usopp talking to Luffy and Zoro in Syrup Village. They're in the kitchen. There's this one shot of Usopp sitting at the table, and they use a fisheye lens on the scene, but Usopp is not center frame. He's off to the left. So what happens when you do this? Well, you have the focus of the scene is Usopp, because Usopp's the one talking, so we're looking directly at him. Because of the fisheye effect and the blur on the edge of the screens that stretches everything out, Usopp's right arm is absolutely massive, while his left arm looks comically tiny by comparison. Like straight up, it looks like he's only been working out his right arm for years. I mean, I guess he must really like Kaya or something, I don't know. Point is, this doesn't look good, and I don't understand what this effect does for the scene that using a normal lens wouldn't. Like, what visually does this add besides making it look weird? The presentation in general of certain scenes could have been better. I think the Luffy and Shanks hat scene was serviceable, it was fine for what it is, but I still prefer the original, because in the original, you know, Shanks gives Luffy his hat right there in front of his crew, in front of the vast ocean that Luffy's going to be setting out on for an adventure in the future. It's a very different feel from what they did in the show, which is they have Shanks give Luffy the hat in like some back alley storage room. It didn't feel like they captured the dramatic flair that that scene should have, and considering that's like the single greatest motivator for Luffy's entire character, it's weird to me that they didn't put more dramatic emphasis on it. It's like they kind of just had Shanks give him the hat in this like one random room instead of recapturing the beauty and drama of the original scene. I would have done that differently. Now let's talk about the soundtrack. I loved a lot of the tracks in this show. And I'm a guy that takes the soundtrack to things very, very seriously. And I'm a huge, huge fan of Kohei Tanaka's original score for One Piece. I think it's really great. So many memorable tracks in there. A lot of them are bound to just make me tear up listening to them. And I gotta say, the One Piece live action did pretty good when it comes to creating the music tracks that are going to hit those very same moments that the original soundtrack did. And it didn't feel too jarring to me to hear different music than what I'm used to hearing when it comes to One Piece. A lot of the times, the tracks that were composed for this show felt like they could have almost been thrown into the anime and they would work there too, with a few exceptions, and we'll talk about that. But first off, I just want to start by saying that the soundtrack as a whole to the live action was really good at what it set out to do. It wanted to set this tone of a grand adventure, a very, very dramatic and beautiful world, and the orchestral arrangements really hit those marks for me. I think a lot of the tracks, especially the various arrangements of the main theme, or I guess Luffy's theme, I think they really, really hit home for me. I love that theme song, and the main theme of the show that comes in every title card is super hype in my opinion. So they did a good job there. I really like how all the characters have their own distinct theme songs, and the OST constantly jumps between the musical motifs depending on who is on screen. So it'll have something with Luffy on screen, it'll be playing Luffy's theme for a second, it'll cut to Kuro, it'll play Kuro's theme, it'll cut to Zoro, and then it'll play Zoro's theme, and then to Nami, and so on and so forth. And it's such a dynamic soundtrack. It's constantly jumping between all these character theme songs that it felt great. It felt like there was flow. Every time a character was on screen, not only was the acting establishing their character, but you have this music in the background that really exemplifies their personality. Zoro's theme is by far my favorite track in the show. I could not get it out of my head. When they were playing it during like the well scene where Zoro's climbing out of the well and it's like this dramatic swell is building up, the whole flashback with Kuina, it hit, man. And it's not like I'm like a Zoro diehard fan or anything. I love Zoro, but like, I don't know what it was about this theme. It just hit different. I would put this in the anime if I could. I love his theme song in the show. And I really like Luffy's too. I think it's great. Nami's has a really nice flair to it with the flute. Yeah, in general, all the theme songs really slapped for me. There's a few that I didn't like, and we'll get to that in a bit. But before we do, let me talk about the emotional music as well, because I think one of the big parts about One Piece are those emotional high points, those moments that are supposed to be tearjerkers. I think the soundtrack plays a big part in that, you know? Everyone knows Golden Odin, everyone knows To the Grand Line. I was wondering how they'd be able to follow that up in the live action, and I think they did it very well. Another amazing surprise to me was just when I was totally resigned to not hearing any of the original soundtrack in the show, right after they get the Going Merry, it cuts to a scene of them sailing off on the ocean on their new ship, and then boom, an orchestral arrangement of We Are starts playing. And I'll tell you guys, it got the tears out. It hit me, man. Hearing We Are just booming the moment that they get the Going Merry in this show and they're sailing on the ocean, and like, I couldn't believe my eyes and ears. It really felt like, man, this is it. This is One Piece. Like, I'm watching the Straw Hats sail off into the distance with We Are blasting in the background with a beautiful orchestra. I mean, it doesn't get better than that, guys. I would say they nailed it there, and I love that they saved that for when the Straw Hats officially get their ship. Like, once they truly become the Straw Hat crew is when we hear We Are kick in. That being said, there were some parts of the soundtrack I didn't really like. Two villains come to mind when it comes to their theme songs that I wasn't a huge fan of. Number one was Captain Kuro. I did not like Kuro's theme. I did not like the Black Cat Pirate's theme. Captain Kuro is supposed to be this vicious pirate disguised as some high-class aristocrat butler type dude, okay? And I feel like the way you represent this in his theme song is you juxtapose some sort of like classy, elegant sounding music with some harsh pirate sounding music, and you have these sort of themes bounce back and forth to show Kuro's change from gentle, high-class butler into brutish, savage, killer pirate. I think that would have been a much more appropriate theme song to fit him. But what they went with instead, I guess to match the whole setup that they did, where it's like a killer, you're trapped in a house with a serial killer, murder house scenario. I guess because they were doing that, their decision for Kuro's theme song was to basically take something straight out of the movie Psycho and then slap a cat stinger over it, like a cat meowing. It was like, that shit was fucking annoying to me. I'm gonna be perfectly honest to you. I did not enjoy that part of the soundtrack. I know that I might be the only one on this, but I would have hoped that they went with a little bit less of a generic evil killer theme song for the guy. The other one that I didn't like too much is Arlong's theme. I know this might also come as a surprise. I heard a lot of people seem to like Arlong's theme. I don't. I think it's very out of place. In my opinion, trap music doesn't really work in One Piece. The period that the One Piece world is supposed to take place in is one that's pre-electronic and technological advancement. I know, you can talk about Vegapunk and everything in the Grand Line or whatever, but like, look at the aesthetic of the show. They're sailing around on boats. Like the era that it's set in is obviously it's not in our real world, but it's not supposed to be technologically advanced where you see people commonly listening to like modern style music, like dance music, trap music. I just don't think it works. I don't think it's really period appropriate. I know it's weird to say, but it just feels like it clashes with the dramatic orchestral sounds of the rest of the soundtrack. This is the climactic peak of the entire season, fighting like the most evil guy they've encountered so far. And every time he's on screen, I'm halfway expecting him to start spitting bars. Like, it takes away from the intimidation factor. And to be honest, the beat wasn't even that good. It sounded kind of cheap, like something right out of Epic Rap Battles of History. Epic Rap Battles of History! Luffy versus Arlong! Begin!
Pirate king who can't swim in the sea. Nami is mine, bitch. Hop off my D.
So I don't know. I mean, the vibes just didn't really land for me in terms of Arlong's theme song. It just kind of felt jarring and out of place in a One Piece show. But whatever. He's a character that's like over and done with in the first season. So it's not like that's going to be coming back anytime soon, or at least I don't think it will. But yeah, the main issue I really have with the OST is with the villain music. I think those are like the two that stuck out to me, but everything else was good. I liked all the other music, all the other tracks. I can definitely see myself coming back and listening to parts of this OST on my own, just for fun in the future. So I gotta give them credit where credit is due. The soundtrack as a whole was great. It was handled great, and I think most of the music in this show does what it's supposed to do. It got the emotions out of me. It matched the scenes tonally, 90% of the time. So well done. Okay, now it's time for the big one, right? The writing. This is going to be a longer section, I think. We're going to be talking about pretty much top to bottom every episode. How was the writing in this show? How did they handle adapting the arcs? There's a lot of good, but in my opinion, there's also a lot of stuff they dropped the ball on, and I think it's important to point this stuff out if the show is going to succeed in the future. Assuming we're getting a season 2, it seems to be doing very well so far, so I really, really want season 2 to improve upon the things that season 1 didn't really do very well. Before we do that, we have to talk about the elephant in the room here. The story of the One Piece live action is not one-to-one with the manga. It's actually quite different. It makes a lot of changes, a lot of plot additions, condenses certain arcs, and even places characters in arcs that they were not supposed to be in originally. So a lot of stuff got changed around. In many cases, I think it was for the better, and obviously we have to compromise, right? We can only fit so much into 8 one-hour-long episodes. They're not going to be able to cover every little detail. They're not going to be able to give every character screen time. They had to make cuts and decisions that really, were the best for the plot and helped us get through East Blue in a timely fashion. So I understand where a lot of these changes came from. I'm going to go over what some of those changes did for the story, or what they actually meant with those changes, and why some of them are good and why some of them are bad, why some of them are fucking terrible, in my opinion. But we'll talk about all that. First, let's start with Shellstown, episode 1, okay? Positives first, and then we'll get to the negatives right at the end. Episode 1 I liked. It was pretty straightforward. They kept us really close to the OG. I like the way that Garp is brought into the mix. Kobe, Helmeppo, and Garp as a whole plot line that kind of develops off of this episode 1 is really cool, and I think that bringing Garp there into Shellstown, having him hold Axe-Hand Morgan accountable, I thought that was cool. I thought that worked. For the most part, though, the episode is almost the same as it is in the manga. I'm just pretty sure Nami isn't supposed to be there. They kind of condensed Nami into this plot line when she's supposed to show up for the first time in Orangetown. But in my opinion, I think that's fine. Speaking of Orangetown, I really love how they handled Orangetown this time around. In the original, I don't really have any issues with the arc. I think Shushu is great, and I think, the whole fight with Buggy and stuff is, comical. It's fine for what it is. But I think the changes they made here were great. I think it was great from a storytelling perspective, from a characterization perspective. And let me explain. They basically changed the locale or the setting of the entire arc from the exterior out in the destroyed village of Orangetown, Buggy sitting and chilling on a roof firing buggy balls at everything and fighting in the streets. They changed that. They actually made it so that almost the entire episode takes place inside of Buggy's circus. And what did Buggy do? He took the entire town hostage as an audience for his circus show. That's fucking genius, in my opinion. I don't think there's any better way to handle that than the way they did. If I could, I would actually change the manga to this. I really like it a lot better. I think it adds character to Buggy, showing that he's supposed to be this dumb clown. He's starved for attention, kind of. He's a small fish in the East Blue, but he has ties to all these major pirates, so clearly he's aspiring to be as great or as powerful and intimidating as them, but he can't really get anyone to like him because he's kind of just, a fool, an outcast, as he described in the episode. So how does he get people to appreciate his flashiness, his performative nature? Well, he raids a town and then takes the entire town hostage as a studio audience, having them hold up the signs telling the audience to laugh and applause, having Buggy walk in and be like, no, that's all wrong, you timed it wrong, the spotlight's not on me. I love that, man. I thought that was so perfect for his character. I also liked how when Buggy did capture the Straw Hats, he threw them into these like circus style torture devices, like putting Zoro on the wheel and spinning the wheel and having Kabaji like throw knives at him. I thought that was hilarious. It was really, really good. Putting Nami in the bird cage so that she could lockpick her way out, putting Luffy in a tank full of seawater, the Harry Houdini style, like trapped in a tank, I gotta undo these cuffs to get out before I drown. Buggy stuffed Luffy in one of those tanks. I thought that was cool. These things added so much more to Buggy's circus clown aesthetic than just a bunch of guys sitting around partying, because the original Buggy didn't even really have to be a clown. You could have just substituted any normal pirate there and it would have pretty much worked for the plot, but in this case they really leaned into the clown element of his character, and I like that. The only thing I didn't really like about that specific aspect is his introduction scene where he does this kind of like Joker style laugh. I thought that was a little bit too heavy-handed. I know Buggy's supposed to be based on the Joker, at least in inspiration, but it was just kind of ham-fisted to me. Didn't really fit. Now keep in mind, this entire time we have a side plot developing that's actually completely new. Nowhere to be found really in the manga, I guess, aside from Kobe and Helmeppo's cover story. But we have Kobe and Garp developing a mentor-mentee relationship here. Also on the side, we have Kobe learning to be a leader and also developing a friendship with Helmeppo. They go from kind of hating each other, or rather Helmeppo really hating on Kobe, to both of them kind of learning to deal with each other's quirks and bonding over their goals. And this takes place slowly over the course of the season, obviously, but I just want to point out that as I go over these episodes, in the background there's this constant running plot line of Kobe, Helmeppo, and Garp in the Marines, and I thought that was cool to see such a detailed look at Marine operations and Kobe's life in the Marines. Part of me always wanted to see that in the manga. I know we got the cover story, but as a Kobe fan, as a guy who really likes Kobe, as a guy who loves Garp, I always wanted to see more. That was never enough for me, and this show is really delivering on that. Syrup Village is the first place in the plot that all these major plot changes really start to come to a head. In my opinion, this version of Syrup Village is an upgrade over the original plot structure. I don't think it's an upgrade in every aspect. As a matter of fact, I think it's a downgrade regarding Usopp's character development. But as a whole, the framework for the arc, I think, is way, way better in the live action than in the manga. Why is that? Well, in the original, I would say, and I think most people would agree, that Syrup Village is probably the low point of East Blue in the manga. It's one of the slowest arcs. It has one of the least interesting villains. The side characters that they fight in the arc are also really goofy and dumb, and ultimately a lot of people don't like Usopp early on in the story. Usopp really grows on people once they get into the Grand Line, once they hit Little Garden, and once they get to Alabasta. And prior to that, he's just kind of like annoying for a lot of people. I know some of you guys are going to crucify me for this. You don't agree with me, but let's be honest here. The general consensus among One Piece fans, I think, is that really early Usopp is kind of annoying. Combine that with a pretty slow, uninteresting arc overall, pretty generic scenery, and you have a dull arc compared to everything else in East Blue. Not to say that Syrup Village is bad in the original. I like Syrup Village. It's just that when you compare it to like the genius that is Arlong Park or Baratier, it falls flat. So how did they remedy this in the live action? How did they quote unquote fix Syrup Village? Well, instead of having the whole plot take place in the village and have the fight with Kuro take place on the hill just outside of the village, they had the whole thing take place in Kaya's mansion, which I thought was such an interesting twist. Making the entire arc take place within the mansion, having all the Straw Hats and Usopp and Kaya locked in the mansion with a murderous psychopath was genius. It's such a change of scenery. Being trapped in the house with a killer is way more gripping than fighting on some random hill. It made for a lot more close and personal character interactions. Like when they first get to the mansion, we have all this talk from Nami about how rich people kind of suck and they're emotionless and they're selfish and they don't give anything out to other people out of the good of their hearts. And you have Luffy like fighting her on this point, being like, no, that's not true. I can convince Kaya to give us a ship. Then you have Nami, you know, once they get into the mansion and they meet Kaya, they see how nice she is, and little by little you see Nami's opinion on Kaya and I guess general opinion on what being rich does to you. You see that opinion change. They go into the changing room. Kaya offers them to change their clothes and they use one of the closets that Kaya has, a walk-in closet with thousands of clothing items in there. You have Luffy sitting there wondering, what does someone do with all these clothes? They must feel so lonely in such a big empty house with all these material possessions. And Nami's like, no, they don't feel the same way that you and me do. They don't have the same emotions we do. She doesn't feel lonely. She feels good about herself with all these possessions. It culminates in this scene where Nami is stealing items from the house in the middle of the night, and she accidentally stumbles into Kaya, and Kaya catches her in the act. And instead of reprimanding or getting angry or screaming at Nami or kicking her out of the house, she just kind of welcomes her in and has a conversation with her about what it is that matters to her, who they are as people. And ultimately it ends in Kaya explaining to Nami that she lost her parents in a tragic accident and she's never been the same since. You know, how this heartbreaking dialogue of Kaya talking about losing her loved ones and being all alone in this world. And Nami, you know, like as a One Piece fan, if we're watching this and you know that Nami, she gets it, right? She lost Bellemere. She went through a very similar experience, and you see this bond between her and Kaya, and Nami realizing the error in her way of thinking. It's really genius, especially this one moment where Kaya finishes her explanation and then she asks Nami, have you ever lost anyone close to you? And you see Nami consider her answer for a quick second and then she just goes, nope. But you, as a One Piece fan, would know. You're like, oh, that's a lie, Nami. You're lying right there. You see this like little evolution of her character take place over the course of their trip to Kaya's mansion, and this is something that never happens in the original manga, but it's brilliant. It's such good foreshadowing for her character. It's a great character building moment. It makes you really empathize with Kaya more and care for Kaya's well-being more when you see how emotional and tragic her life is. We have the scene of like Zoro, Luffy, and Usopp in the kitchen. Usopp shooting like the kernels into a pan, and they start trading stories about their past experiences. Luffy talks to Usopp about his dad. Usopp and Luffy start talking about like whether, you know, how he feels about Kaya, and Usopp has this really funny moment where he asks Zoro if Kaya likes him, and I just thought that was hilarious. Like, it's a really funny joke. Zoro's like, you're asking the wrong guy. There's like a lot of like these really endearing moments that take place in this mansion, and it culminates in this really cool sequence with Kuro and the cat siblings, who, by the way, I love that they're relegated to also being staff in the mansion. But anyway, they lock down the entire mansion with this system that's supposed to keep out the pirates, but in this case it's locking the pirates in with all the victims and the good guys. The lights go out in the house, it's all dark, the whole episode takes place at night. It's just, the vibes are so different from the original and way more intense, way more interesting. Aside from plot things and little story quirks that I didn't like, I do think overall the general plot change of how Syrup Village is structured was 100% an upgrade. Another couple huge upgrades to me was having Usopp work in Kaya's shipyard, serving as a plausible explanation for why Usopp is really good at like constructing things or building things or making contraptions, or kind of serves as the temporary shipwright for the Going Merry for a while. I think that's great. Like having him work in Kaya's shipyard, having Luffy meet him in the shipyard, literally on the Going Merry, I thought that was a great change. Having Kobe come to the island chasing after Luffy and the Straw Hats was really cool because of the payoff that happens at the end of episode 3, where after the whole plot with Kuro is revealed and Usopp realizes he's gonna go kill everyone, Usopp starts running through the town, as we know, shouting, "The pirates are here, the pirates are here, everyone run for your lives," and no one believes him, of course, boy who cried wolf style. Usopp then collapses in the middle of the street to his knees. He's like, "Pirates are here, why won't anyone believe me?" And he's crying and it seems like all hope is lost. And then the camera pans to the right, turns, and then you see Kobe bent over staring at Usopp, and then he says, "I believe you." And then the episode cuts to credits. Oh my god, I watched that scene back like 3 times. I liked it so much. It gave me chills, guys. That was such a great change to the plot. Kobe is there to do his job, and he needs to stop Luffy because that's his assignment. And Luffy's like, "Look, Kobe, I know you have a job to do, but I'm gonna go protect my friends, and you're not gonna get in my way." Both are on opposite sides here, and they have to come face to face only a mere 2 episodes after their friendship began. And I think that's a pretty intense moment. It's a really cool thing. I do wish that their meeting was kind of delayed until later, maybe towards the end of the season before they reconvened, but I thought it was fine for what it was, and it made for good storytelling. The last couple major additions I would say they made is, number 1, Mary got killed this time around. Kuro actually straight up murders Mary in this arc, which I thought was a little bit weird. I guess it made for some dramatic tension. They seem to be upping the level of violence, I guess for the sake of Hollywood or whatever. But yeah, Mary did die here. I guess that's all right. It's kind of like a hit or miss for people. I wouldn't be super surprised if you didn't like that change. One change I really did like though was at the very, very end of the arc, when Usopp and Kaya say goodbye to each other, they actually kiss. That's like the big one, and a lot of people that caught them by surprise. I don't think anyone was ready for Usopp and Kaya to kiss. I know that one of Oda's stipulations for the writers of the show was no romance between the Straw Hats, but that doesn't stop the Straw Hats from having a romance with characters outside the crew. They really leaned into that. They had Usopp and Kaya kiss goodbye, and I thought that was a good change. It gives Usopp something to come back to, right? Anytime Usopp is in a life or death situation in the future, it'll be cool to call back to that kiss or that moment and be like, no, I have to return home to Kaya like I promised. I think that's going to add for some dramatic tension and flair to his character. Next up, we have Baratier, and Baratier was great. I gotta say, overall, I mean, it wasn't too different from the manga. I feel like they did most of the things the same, or as they should have been. There was a major plot change that happened here that I'll be getting to in a second, and they kind of condensed arcs to make things fit. I actually like the change, but I'll be explaining that. First off, Sanji and Zeph are perfect, man. I think Zeph is possibly one of the best adaptations of the characters from One Piece into the live action. It feels like Zeph straight up walked off the page, bro. It's like, if there's ever a second One Piece live action adaptation, they will never get a Zeph as good as this one. This one was perfect. I really like Sanji here. I think, I didn't really get to talk about each of the individual Straw Hats too much, but I do like all of their characterizations in the show, especially Sanji's. I think his really shined in the Baratier, and he was a very entertaining addition to the crew when he finally got added, especially the banter between him and Zoro that kind of takes place ever since his introduction. It's really good. I think they nailed it in that regard. So Sanji is great. Let's talk about the general plot structure of Baratier here. So we have the standard Luffy ends up eating food, doesn't have the money to pay for it, offers to pay in treasure. Zeph gets upset, has Luffy work in the kitchen as a dish boy. Because of this, they end up having to stay the night. They end up staying the night at Baratier. Everyone else goes and gets drinks, parties, hangs out while Luffy's busy in the kitchen scrubbing away. Luffy in the kitchen meets Sanji. While they're in the kitchen, Gin knocks on the door, comes in starving, looking for a meal. Sanji gives him food, and Luffy realizes that Sanji's a really good guy. They talk about their dreams. This all sounds perfectly normal. Here's where the changes start to happen. Because of the fact that they're staying there overnight, this arc does not take place in the course of one afternoon. It takes place over 2 days, and what this does for the plot is the following. Number 1, it changes the context of Zoro and Mihawk's duel. It changes the context of Nami leaving the crew to go to Arlong Park, and it changes how certain other things play out, including the villain of the arc, who, cat out of the bag here, it's not Don Krieg. Don Krieg actually dies before he ever gets to Baratier, and he's killed by Mihawk. Garp, this is where the Garp plotline comes in. Garp sends Mihawk, 6 Mihawk on Luffy, and has him go to Baratier to collect Luffy and bring him to Garp. what this ends up doing is that Mihawk's introduction is drastically changed, and he's not introduced sailing in on like the coffin boat or whatever on his own just after having destroyed Krieg's fleet. No. He actually is in the middle of destroying Krieg's fleet in the Grand Line. We're watching it happen in real time. He picks up the phone and talks to Garp, is like, all right, yeah, I'll be there. Kills Krieg, goes to Baratier, and then meets the Straw Hats at Baratier during the night while Luffy's in the kitchen washing dishes. What this means is that Krieg never actually comes to Baratier, it's only Gin. Gin is the last survivor of the crew, and he basically warns Luffy and Sanji, don't go to the Grand Line, it's a dangerous place. But Krieg's gone, he's nowhere to be seen. This leads into another major change where Zoro challenges Mihawk upon meeting him at the bar in Baratier. Speaking of which, big thanks to Netflix for allowing me to make a guest appearance in the show. Zoro and Mihawk meet at a bar in the middle of the night. Zoro basically explains to him, I've been looking to challenge you my entire life. I've followed your career since I was a kid. I'm gonna kill you tomorrow. Let's have a duel. And Mihawk agrees, and they're like, okay, let's have a duel tomorrow at noon. So this changes the whole context, because in the original, it was like a spur of the moment thing. Zoro challenges Mihawk, they fight then and there, Mihawk leaves. In this case, Mihawk pulls up, Zoro challenges him, and they have a whole night to build tension and think about what's about to happen the next morning. What's cool about this is that Zoro and Nami have a really, really nice scene where they bond. And they do this like drinking game where they try and guess about each other's past. It's very similar to like the drinking game that Tyrion would play in Game of Thrones. And they bond over this, and they become like much closer by the end of this conversation. Immediately following their bonding drinking game, Mihawk pulls up, Zoro challenges him, and now we have the rest of the night where Nami is freaking out and like worried for Zoro's safety, questioning if that decision was right. She goes on to ask Luffy, like, don't let him do this is gonna get him killed. And Luffy asks Zoro, is like, is this what you want to do? This is your dream? Zoro says yes. Luffy's like, I gotta stand by my boy, this is his dream. So there's a lot of like really cool interactions and things that come off of this Zoro Mihawk situation that never really got to happen in the manga, because in the manga, by the time Zoro and Mihawk fight, I'm pretty sure Nami's gone already. She already left for Arlong Park, so she's not even there for that. There's another switch up that happens because of this, because of the fact that they're staying overnight. She's looking for a boat. She's secretly trying to go back to Arlong Park. Someone approaches her and says, hey, I have a ship that's going there tomorrow morning. If you want to go, meet me there at noon. Don't be late or we'll leave without you. And the very next day, when Zoro's about to have his duel with Mihawk, at the same time, we see Nami approach the boat, ready to abandon the crew and then go to Arlong Park. We think she's about to leave, just like she does in the manga, but then last second, it turns out she didn't take the boat. She stays behind, stays with the Straw Hat crew, and supports Zoro in his duel and is there for him. As a matter of fact, after the duel's over and Zoro becomes comatose, Nami ends up sitting next to him in the cabin and reading him storybooks. She reads him Nolan the Liar, which was one of the coolest plot additions I've ever fucking seen. Like, brilliant. I loved that. There was also another really cool thing that came out of this where Zeph, because they didn't have a doctor, Zeph dressed Zoro's wounds with an old sailor's trick, you know, like cutting the skin off a fish and using it to disinfect the wound or whatever. That was like a great character moment for Zeph too. And I think all these changes were ultimately for the better. I think it made for a more realistic feeling Baratier, a more dramatic feeling one where the build up and the crew dynamic is really evolving here just as they get their fifth member, right? As they recruit Sanji, they bring on their last Straw Hat. This is where the crew dynamic really starts to come to a head. Just before Arlong Park gut punches that and pulls Nami out, we have all the crew really starting to come into form here, so I like that. The looming question that you may have if you haven't watched the show is, if Krieg isn't here, then who the hell is the villain of Baratier? Is it just Mihawk? No. Actually, the way they did it is they condensed Arlong Park slightly into Baratier, and they had, instead of Krieg coming and messing up the restaurant, Arlong and his crew swims all the way over to Baratier, and they're the ones that disrupt everything. They're the ones that actually come and fuck everything up. They're the pirates that essentially hold Baratier hostage temporarily. And I think it's very fitting, you know? Makes sense for him to be swimming all over the place. It's really cool to see fishmen swimming from one island all the way over to the Baratier just to chase a target. I think it adds an extra element to the fishmen as an intimidating, you know, pirate force when you can see them, they don't even even need a boat. They're just swimming everywhere. We didn't really get that in the manga, you know? Arlong was very contained to Arlong Park, and he didn't really leave Arlong Park in any way. But in this show, they actually have Arlong moving around the world. He goes all the way to Orangetown to interrogate Buggy. He swims all the way to Baratier to confront Luffy. That all makes sense to me, and I think it's fine. I think Arlong is a better villain than Krieg anyway, so I'd rather him have more build-up and more focus than this random throwaway villain that never ends up being relevant in the manga again. Lastly, this next thing doesn't actually come from the Baratier episodes, but it takes place in the Baratier, so I just want to mention it. There's a scene where Zeph and Garp have a one-on-one conversation, and I think it's probably the best scene in the entire show. I won't say much more, because I just think the scene speaks for itself, but these are two guys I would have never thought to be put in a room together, and it was awesome, man. Like, having these two, like, veterans of the pirate golden age exchanging war stories and talking about the good old days and shooting the shit and bantering in the middle of Baratier, Garp just devouring a steak like an animal. That was awesome. I loved every second of that scene. That's probably my single favorite scene in the entire show. Wrapping up the good stuff, we got Arlong Park. And I actually have a lot of bad things to say about Arlong Park. I think this is one of the weakest parts of the show, but before we do that, let's talk about the good. I like the look of the island. I like the look of Arlong Park as a whole. The exterior, the rest of the island, it all looks great. It looks as it should. They do look like they're an impoverished village, like they've been put through hell and back trying to pay tribute to these guys. There was that one scene where, you know, Arlong and the fishmen first raid the village in Nami's flashback, and it looked perfect. It's like exactly as it should have looked. Arlong lifting and flipping the house over. I think all that stuff they nailed. The fishmen, you know, I could see you not liking their designs. They do look kind of wacky. In my opinion, it's in a good way. It reminds me of like the aliens in Mos Eisley Cantina from like Star Wars. You know, they're all practical effects. They're wearing actual makeup and costumes. So I think it would have helped if they did a hybrid. Like if they did practical effects combined with CGI, they could have made the fishmen look a lot better. Overall, if you can get past that, I think it's not a negative thing. I actually like the look of some of the fishmen in the show. There's that one guy that was sitting down playing poker with the sunglasses. I really liked his design. There was a few scenes that were like pretty much captured one-to-one with the manga, like when the Straw Hats are gathering for the walk to Arlong Park. That was like one-to-one. I loved it. It was beautiful. The fights were amazing, especially Usopp versus Chu. That was a pleasant surprise to me. I think they handled that great. Having Chu just straight up explode. Would not have believed you if you told me that Usopp had a kill under his belt, but it looks like he does as of this arc in the show. So the only thing I would say is maybe Garp meeting Luffy after Arlong Park is all said and done. They have this whole moment where Garp and Luffy meet finally, and Garp confronts Luffy about his dream or his goals as a pirate and kind of comes to terms with it. They have a little bit of a fight. Garp like knocks Luffy over. He does like a clothesline on Luffy and then really like sends him flying, almost like Kaido did, interestingly enough. I think that the meeting between Garp and Luffy happened a bit too soon here, but, you know, maybe they have some plans for this. They wanted to kind of round things out by the end of season 1, so I understand. And the party scene, everyone's partying, Usopp's telling stories to you know, the villagers, Luffy's eating food, Zoro's getting drunk, Nami's happy, you know, visiting Bellemir's grave, and she makes the orange pinwheel. Like, that was all beautiful. I think the arc wrapped up in a really nice way. The show as a whole wrapped up in a great way, and it ended with the Straw Hats putting their feet on the barrel and making their promises and shouting their goals, and, you know, just before they hit the Grand Line. Interestingly enough, though, they do this before Logtown, and Logtown is actually nowhere in this season. I'm assuming it's going to be how they start season 2. They actually do a teaser at the end of Smoker, so Smoker is going to be coming in season 2. It's just that they didn't hit Logtown this season. They ended it right after Arlong Park. I really wish it would have had them just outside of Logtown with the storm going. I think that's the perfect end to the prologue of One Piece. I feel like they should have made that work, maybe spent a little bit less time in Syrup Village, a little bit more time in the latter half of the season, but maybe the reason for this is because they just had no way to do it. Maybe they really want to do a lot with Logtown. Logtown's a very important location. They have to introduce a bunch of characters like Smoker, Tashigi, Dragon. That's something that might take an entire episode to cover, so I don't think they could have fit that in episode 8. They might have needed a whole extra episode to do so, and maybe they just didn't have the time constraints or the budget to do that, so I understand. Overall, the show ended on a great note, and it left me feeling very happy and satisfied with the experience that I had watched. I had fun every episode. It was really fun as a fan to look for all the Easter eggs. It was really fun to see all the new things, you know, especially when you've been through the story as many times as me. To have new things happen, to have plot lines change, and things catch you off guard that you're not expecting is a really refreshing experience. I think it's a great show for people that are new to One Piece, and even for ongoing One Piece fans. There's a lot of new refreshing stuff to experience, so I would recommend that. All the Straw Hats felt great. I think my favorite of the Straw Hat performances might either be Sanji or Nami right now. I kind of change my opinion every day. I like Usopp a lot more than I liked him in the manga when I first started One Piece. I think Usopp is great. I think Luffy is great. I like them. But really, to me, like the characters that really hit home for me were Sanji and Nami. I think they did a great job. Zoro too. Zoro's good. I was a little bit apprehensive about his edgy, soft-spoken nature at the beginning of the show, but it grew on me. They played a lot of jokes off of that character trait. I always felt Zoro was more of a macho character, not so much of like a soft-spoken assassin, but whatever. I think by the end of the season, they really did get Zoro's character right, so he's great too. Yeah, all the cast was really likable, and the show was really fun. So in terms of the story, those are all the positives I could think of listed out. Let's bookend this video by talking about some of the things I did not like with the story, and then we'll just wrap things up. From top to bottom, I'm just gonna kind of go through these Cinema Sins style. And just to clarify, this is not to like roast the show. I'm not trying to say that this means the show is terrible or whatever, but I do think these things are worth noting because they did mess some things up pretty severely in my opinion. Morgan was not that bad of a guy in the live action. That was one thing that surprised me, was that Axe Hand Morgan pretty much didn't do anything really bad or condemnable. He was just like a really strict asshole-ish Marine. Like, he was kind of a dick to his son. But aside from that, like, there's not really much that Axe Hand Morgan did that was, like, evil. In the original manga, Morgan threatens to execute a little girl and puts Zoro on the cross, the crucifix, for like, what is it, like 3 weeks, and then still plans to kill him after that. Not only that, but towards the end of the arc, he orders his own Marines to kill themselves with their rifles. Like, he straight up orders them to either kill the girl or kill themselves. That dude is straight up evil in the manga. But in the show, all that's cut out. Axe Hand Morgan does nothing besides put Zoro up on the cross. And even then, he tells Zoro, like, hey, you can go up on the cross 7 days, but you won't be able to be a bounty hunter anymore because I'm going to spread bad word about you to all the other Marines. You attacked my kid. I don't know. That's not the most unreasonable thing in the world. And it's not like Morgan himself said that he was gonna have Zoro executed. It was Helmeppo's sorry ass who walked up to him on the stake and said, well, you think my dad's gonna let you live? There's no way. He just said to Morgan 10 minutes ago, I'm gonna turn myself in. I don't want to work for you, so just put me on the cross. I'll put up with the punishment. And then like 10 minutes later, he gets a little shit talking from Helmeppo, and he's like suddenly cool with Luffy freeing him and not sticking to his word. That was like a really bizarre thing, because Morgan didn't seem like that much of a villain in the episode, so that really came off to me as odd. Luffy's flashback. Shanks saves Luffy in a boat instead of the water. Why is this a problem, right? In the scene where Luffy's almost eaten by the Lord of the Coast is important because Luffy is thrown into the water because he has a devil fruit and he can't swim. Higuma throws Luffy. To us it may seem obvious, but to someone that doesn't know anything about One Piece, does Shanks have a devil fruit? Right? That's an important question. If we don't see Shanks swimming in the water, then we don't know. We have no confirmation. Now, us, obviously, in the manga, we know the answer to this, but someone watching the show wouldn't know the answer. So the fact that Shanks saves Luffy from drowning in the water and swims in the water to save him gives us very important information about Shanks as a character, and also establishes some of the consequences for eating a devil fruit, like immediately. And the show was missing that. Another thing, Zoro asks, you know, it made for a very funny joke, and I did laugh at it more than once when it happened. But Luffy is talking about Shanks, and then Zoro goes, who the hell is Shanks? Now I get it, it's a funny joke, right? It doesn't make sense to me that Zoro doesn't know who Shanks is, considering that a couple episodes later, he says to Mihawk, I've been following your career ever since I was a child. If you've been following Mihawk's career ever since you were a child, then you absolutely must know Shanks, because he's like one of the most important figures in Mihawk's past. Shanks is one of the most infamous pirates on the sea, and Zoro is a bounty hunter who chases pirates for a living and studied the career of Hawkeye Mihawk. How is it that he doesn't know who Shanks is? That doesn't make sense. Another thing that didn't make sense was Luffy finding the Gum Gum fruit. He gets mad at Shanks for treating him like a kid and not letting him join the crew, and then he storms off into, I guess, Shanks's room or something, and there's like 15 treasure chests in this room, and Luffy could have opened any one of those treasure chests out of curiosity, but he walks directly towards the back of the room and picks out a tiny chest from behind all the others, like something completely inconspicuous, and for whatever reason just decides to pick this random chest up and open it up to find the Gum Gum fruit. There's no context for him finding the fruit. There's no context for him eating the fruit. In the original story, he was hungry, and Shanks left the fruit sitting out there in the open on the table. So Luffy went and ate the fruit because he was hungry when Shanks wasn't looking. Now, what we know now about Gear 5 and the Nika fruit thing, maybe it holds some implications about why Shanks left that fruit out there out in the open. Maybe that was part of his plan. Maybe he did that intentionally, but we lose that entire element in the show because he doesn't eat the fruit out of just like necessity. He, for some reason, goes out of his way to go to a completely separate room, find a treasure chest hidden in the corner of the room, pick it up, open it, find a completely strange looking fruit in there, and just eat it for no reason. Now, you could write this off as, oh, Nika's calling to him or whatever, but I thought the whole point is that Luffy wasn't the chosen one. This is super, super heavy-handed if that's the point of the message, is that Nika's calling to him. Called to him from across the entire bar and from a random tiny chest that's hidden from out of sight. That was a complete mishandling of Luffy getting his devil fruit for the first time. The next point of criticism I have is in Syrup Village, which is, dun-dun-dun-dun, fucking blue tea? Really? In what universe are you ever going to hand someone tea that looks like Windex and they're going to drink it? There's no reason to be that heavy-handed. Like, I get it, the tea's poison, the soup is poison. Why are you making it so glaringly obvious? In the original manga, Klahadore comes off as a really snobby prick, but he doesn't just come off as a straight-up murdering psychopath the moment they meet him. It's not immediately obvious that there's a plot to kill Kaya until we see the plan get announced in the story. But in the live action, the moment we meet Kuro, he's like portrayed as a complete creep, and we see Kaya, like in the second scene, drinking Clorox out of a cup. So to anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together, you can immediately figure out she's being poisoned. There's no tension to the plot in terms of like, what's actually going on here? Where's the mystery? No. Right from the get-go, it's just so obvious that like, she's drinking poison. The tea's blue, the soup is blue. Here, Kaya, have this special medical soup we prepared just for you. Don't eat that delicious looking fish. Eat this blue, disgusting mashed potato soup. It looks like blue fufu. Like, what are you doing? It's like a heavy-handed approach like that to the plot is so unnecessary. It completely ruins any suspension of disbelief I have, because it makes Kuro look like a dumbass for making his plans so obvious, and it makes Kaya look equally like a dumbass for not realizing she's being poisoned after drinking this shit. Speaking of Kuro being a dumbass, he had no hesitation killing Mary. Like, he immediately murdered Mary. And then every other opportunity he had to kill any of the other characters, he just chose the non-violent option. It felt like either he didn't want to kill anyone or that they're protected by plot armor. And big example I can think of is Usopp firing a shot at Kuro, and then Kuro just zips up to Usopp and shoves him. I mean, you have a handful of like katana-length swords coming out of your fingers. Why is the option? You are a murderer. Why is your immediate reaction to just push him? There's more examples of this, like when Sham breaks a bottle off of Zoro's head and knocks him out, which, by the way, to begin with, I'm surprised Zoro got knocked out by a bottle to the head. But then, on top of that, Kuro's just like, oh, we just killed Mary, and then you just knocked this guy out with a bottle. And he just says, oh, dispose of the bodies out back. All it takes is a bottle over the head, and Kuro's like, yep, this guy's not a problem anymore, just ditch the body. He must be dead. This is supposed to be a guy that makes plans meticulously for years at a time. Like, this is Kuro of the 1,000 plans. He's never failed in a raid once, blah, blah, blah. He's such a genius, one of the smartest people in the East Blue. This whole plan has been in the works for years and years. It's all finally coming to fruition, and he lets someone like Zoro potentially get in the way of it. He doesn't take the cautious option of killing Zoro. He just has a bottle broken off of his head, and that's good enough. To me, once again, screams plot armor, screams stupidity on Kuro's part. It just the suspension of disbelief is hard. I think there's a way where you can write it where Kuro can still come off as a killer and not being afflicted by plot armor as strongly. You just don't have a bottle get broken off of Zoro's head. Very simple. Hell, don't even have Zoro be there. Have Usopp be the one and only person that sees Mary get killed and overhears the conversation, and then have Usopp run off. The last thing I have to nitpick with Syrup Village here, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think Usopp did not get the development he should have. So much of the arc was not focused on him. There was no proper close off to Usopp's whole liar thing. Like, the whole boy who cried wolf story for Usopp is supposed to play up into the climax of the arc, and then once the village is saved, primarily thanks to Usopp in the manga, they ask Usopp, hey, don't you want the village to know that you're their hero? And Usopp says, no, let them believe what they want. I don't want them to know that there was some vicious pirates in the town. It's easier for them to sleep at night if they don't know the truth. He actually lets himself be the village liar at the end. He chooses not to take up the mantle of hero. And he tells them, tell him nothing happened. It's like the nothing happened moment for Zoro before Zoro ever even did it. It's one of the most profound moments in Usopp's character when he basically says, let the village hate me, let the village think I'm a liar. I don't care. The important thing is that they're safe. We never get that in the show. So by the end of the arc, it's not entirely apparent to us why Usopp is such a special addition to the crew, right? Every other Straw Hat had some big moment where they either stood up for themselves or someone else or some, I don't know, dramatic, heroic moment that made us appreciate them as a character in the first season. But Usopp, like, pretty much all he did was shoot popcorn kernels into a pan and cower in the corner while Kuro basically threatened his friends' lives. So yeah, I think while Syrup Village, in terms of plot structure, got an upgrade, Usopp got a big downgrade there. I like his characterization. I don't like that the plot skimmed over what makes Usopp such a great character, because it wasn't communicated, in my opinion. What's the deal with Arlong's, like, blue hockey or whatever? Why is Arlong able to beat Luffy up with punches? Like, every time we've seen Arlong do damage to Luffy, it's with a punch. Arlong does not have hockey. Luffy's Devil Fruit makes him completely resistant to blunt damage. In episode 1, we see him take Alvida's mace to the head. But then the moment we get to Arlong Park, Arlong arrives and he starts decking Luffy in the stomach, and Luffy's like getting the wind knocked out of him. He's getting knocked out by Arlong's basic ass punches. Like, Luffy shouldn't be getting hurt by those punches. He shouldn't be getting afflicted by those punches. And it feels like they forgot how Luffy's Devil Fruit works in these scenarios, because they have Arlong beat the shit out of Luffy on their first meeting without even using his teeth or anything at all. He just punches him a bunch of times and grabs him and throws him around. It made Luffy feel incredibly weak and nothing like the Luffy we see in the rest of the season. Not only that, but then immediately after, Nami betrays the Straw Hats there and is like, okay, Arlong, let's go. Arlong threatens to eat Luffy, and then Nami's like, oh, why kill Luffy when you can just drop him in the water and have the ocean do it, since he's a Devil Fruit user? Listen, that would work in Arlong Park if they were surrounded by fishmen, they had no allies to rescue them out of the water or whatever. But it makes no sense to drop Luffy in the water as a means of execution in front of an entire crowd of people who can then immediately after jump into the water and pull him out. Like, did you expect that not to happen? You think no one would rescue Luffy? And by the same token, with the blue hockey thing, there's the scene where Arlong had Buggy tied up, and Buggy's like super afraid of Arlong in this scene. That also didn't make sense to me. Number one, how is Buggy tied up? He has the chop fruit. He can separate every part of his body at a moment's notice. They had him tied up with like rope or something. It wasn't sea stone. They didn't mention sea stone. They didn't mention anything nullifying his devil fruit powers. So why is Buggy just sitting there and letting himself be tied up? Once again, it's like they forgot how his devil fruit works. Arlong threatens to bite Buggy a bunch of times. He's like gonna cut him up or whatever. Once again, Buggy shouldn't be afraid of this because he has the chop fruit. So I don't understand like what they were thinking with these scenes. I feel like they totally mishandled Arlong here. Like, they tried to make him intimidating, but they used the wrong vehicles to do this. They should have had Arlong intimidate weaker characters who actually should be afraid of him, who he actually can harm and kill, not the two guys in the story who like shouldn't be affected by any of his attacks. As a matter of fact, when Arlong and Luffy finally do fight later on, he never uses his teeth against Luffy, and he never uses his sword. He never even uses his sawtooth nose. These are the three things that Arlong possesses that are actually capable of damaging Luffy, and he never uses them. Remember, in the original, Arlong fought Luffy with his sword for a period of time. He fought Luffy with his teeth. He took his teeth straight up out of his mouth and made weapons out of them. This never happens in the live action, so the fight with Arlong and Luffy doesn't even make sense to me. It doesn't even feel like he's approaching the fight properly. Remember Shark on Darts? He never does that either. He never swims. He never really abuses Luffy's weakness to water and tries to exemplify how he's that much better as a fisherman because he can swim. He never does any of that, really. He just kind of fights Luffy like a normal dude. So yeah, I don't understand what was going on with like Arlong's ability to injure people or like devil fruit users or whatever that was. I don't know if they're writing it off as like, oh, well, he's a fishman, so I guess he has the power of the sea that can nullify devil fruit powers, but they never said that in the show, so I'm not just gonna assume that on their behalf. I think it's their responsibility as writers to make that work. And there's more examples of like not understanding the original story or not understanding what made certain things work, which is, for example, like when Nami asks Luffy, help me, and then Luffy puts the hat on her and he's quiet for a minute, right? And then he walks forward and then he shouts, of course I will. That silence is golden. The initial silence that Luffy responds to Nami with, where she asks, help me, and Luffy is like so angry, you can see the emotions bubbling up inside of him, and he's silent, he's completely dead quiet. Places the hat on Nami, walks past her as if he's not even going to give her an answer, and then shouts at the top of his lungs, of course I will, is one of the most important moments. It's like pretty much the high point of East Blue. And in the live action, they have Luffy answer 3 times, and it felt so fucking corny because they didn't let the tension sit in the air. They didn't let the drama of the moment build up the way it should have. They did a really cliche repeat the phrase multiple times, getting successively louder each time. That's like such a tired cliche. My big question here is, why fix what isn't broken? In the original, it worked fine. Why change it? This extends into the walk to Arlong Park, because they walk to Arlong Park, they bust down the door, and Arlong is not even there at the entrance. He's like in the building, so he's not even there to witness the entrance, which was one of the most satisfying things about the original. And not only that, but Nami charges into Arlong Park with them. Like she goes from being at the absolute low point of her entire life, pretty much, to being in like tough, determined, badass mode in like a matter of 10 minutes or whatever. The entire village that wanted to raid Arlong Park also wasn't present. In the original, they all stood outside of Arlong Park and they watched the whole thing go down. I think the village watching the entire thing play out from a distance was like a very important part of that arc. Having Nami not go into Arlong Park with them and stay behind with her fellow townsfolk and the people from her past was also really important in my opinion. This is supposed to be Nami's absolute lowest point in the story, pretty much. This is supposed to be her at her most vulnerable, and yet they throw that out the window for this Avengers-style introduction where all 5 Straw Hats bust through the door, when in reality, Nami should be like bawling her eyes out. She should be fearing for her friends' lives. As far as Nami is concerned, Arlong is the most dangerous person there. As far as she knows, Arlong's probably going to kill her friends. So it doesn't make sense to me that Nami charges in with them with this look of determination when in the original she's supposed to be worried for their lives. She's supposed to be worried that everything's crumbling down around her, and Luffy's gonna be the one to pull her out of that and save her. They have her follow Luffy to the room, and then Luffy kicks her out of the room so that he can fight Arlong, and it just didn't capture what made Arlong Park so impactful originally. The whole idea was that Luffy fights Arlong outside. The fight transitions to inside the building, and while they're inside the building, Luffy accidentally stumbles upon the room that Nami had been prisoner to for all of her childhood. And in this room, which in the original is supposed to be really small, cramped, claustrophobic, there's supposed to be piles and piles of paper stacked to the ceiling everywhere, and you can see the blood on the board. And in the manga, Luffy enters the room, and at first he's like, what is this place? Like, what the hell kind of room is this? And then little by little, he realizes that, oh, fuck, this is Nami's room? This is where she's been her whole life? This little room? And he then proceeds to destroy the entire map room. And they could have done that here, they just chose not to. As a matter of fact, let me just talk about the set of the map room. This might actually be my least favorite set in the entire show, because it doesn't look like a map room. It's a massive arena, basically, that you look at the room and you're like, okay, a fight's gonna happen here. Because it's so obviously, like, it's so massive and spacious, and so obviously, like, a fight set piece first and a plot set piece second, that it doesn't actually feel like a map room. It's just like, this is the designated fighting room for Luffy and Arlong. It's supposed to be like a damp, dark, like, kid's bedroom that they, like, shoved Nami in and forgot about her for years, basically. But they made it look like a dungeon cellar. Is this the dungeon that 4Kids was talking about?
How about a nice room in a dungeon for the rest of your day?
My girls, please, spare them.
If you can't pay the cash, then you're out with the trash. And feel free to quote me. Yeah!
And here's the other big problem I have with the map room, is that it's not clear where in the building it's located. It's supposed to be on the top floor, but the way the room looks like it's on the absolute bottom floor. The interior of the room is circular, so it looks like it's in a castle or some sort of tower or something, but the exterior is like square. It's like a traditional Japanese style tower, so the architecture styles don't even match on the inside and outside. The interior doesn't match the exterior at all. If you didn't know One Piece at all and you're watching this, you'd probably be surprised when the whole thing comes crumbling down from the top bottom. You're like, wait, they've been on the top floor this entire time? You know what was a way to signal that they're on the top floor? Have a desk fly out the window. Have Nami look on and cry and tear up as she watches Luffy tear up the map room, and see everything flying out of the top floor window of Arlong Park. Have those maps and those papers streaming out of the window and blowing away in the wind. That's how you convey location. That's how you convey, like, where we are relative to everything else. But it just felt like they were fighting in like a random basement. And also, speaking on the destruction of the map room, the context in the show is totally different. I explained how it worked in the manga before, but in the show, basically, Arlong is shit-talking Luffy, saying that, oh, you're a puny human, you'll never be able to defeat a fishman. And then Luffy responds by saying, I may not be able to defeat you, but I can destroy everything that you've built. Number one, I'm pretty sure it's just out of character for Luffy to be like, yeah, maybe you can beat me. Like, that's not the type of guy Luffy is. He's so adamant about being Pirate King, he thinks he can kick everyone's ass. In fact, he was just talking about how he's gonna kick Arlong's ass. And all it takes is a little bit of shit talking for Luffy to go, yeah, you know what, maybe you can beat me, but at least I can destroy this building. Why did he destroy the building? Because he can't beat Arlong? That's not the original context. The original context is that he destroys the room, not because of what it means to Arlong, but because of what it means to Nami. The whole point is that room is Nami's prison. It symbolizes her entire tragic past. It's the place that has been keeping her down all these years, that kept her from being free. Luffy destroyed the room because it was holding Nami back. He destroyed the room because he hated what it represented to Nami, not because it was Arlong's treasure, not because Arlong cared about the room. He didn't give a shit about Arlong. That writing, to me, feels like it just missed the whole point of the finale of Arlong Park. Like, it just did not seem to understand. It's supposed to be like Luffy's first real, true example of him being a liberator, like standing up for the values of freedom and freeing someone from bondage. That's like the first time in the story Luffy really does that, and it's not played up here at all. They don't emphasize his motivations at all here. It's just, oh, you insulted my friend, you hurt my friend, so I'm gonna kick your ass. A lot of odd decisions seem to happen after Baratier. And while I like the general structure, I like the scenery, the look of Arlong Park, I like some of the things that happen there, I really do think it's the weakest part of the season. If I had to complain about anything, and you guys just listen to me complain about it endlessly, I gotta say, Arlong Park is the one that I gotta hit with some criticisms here. They really just missed the ball on a lot of Arlong Park. There's a bunch of things I like, but there's a lot of things I really don't like, and I have to emphasize them so heavily because, at least in the original story, Arlong Park is without a doubt the height of East Blue. It's one of the best parts of early One Piece. It's the part that pretty much hooks everyone on the story, and in the live action, I feel like they didn't put as much effort into adapting that as they did Syrup Village, which is the opposite. In the manga, it's like the worst part of East Blue. So they put all this effort into fixing Syrup Village, but they didn't put enough effort into making Arlong Park hit that peak that it should have. Anyway, with that all being said, I want to just wrap this video up by saying thank you to the team involved at Netflix. Thank you to Matt Owens. Thank you to the entire cast for putting together, in my opinion, one of the best live action anime adaptations we have gotten. I know it sounds weird to say that just coming off of like 20 minutes worth of complaints or whatever, but you know, if I had to gauge it, I would say like 20% of the show I didn't really like, and 80% of the show I either liked or was in love with. So, I mean, that's like an 8 out of 10 in my book. That's like a 7, 8 out of 10 as far as I'm concerned when it comes to entertainment. So they really did do a good job. I think they did One Piece justice, and aside from all the little things I could pick on, the general feel of the show, the aesthetic of the show, the music, the vibes, the characters, everything really does work, and they brought One Piece to life. They really brought Oda's vision to life. But like all things, we can always do better, and I really am praying for a season 2, and I think that they'll make season 2 even better than the first one. I hope if anyone from the staff does watch this video, just know that these criticisms are purely out of love for the series and out of love and appreciation for your work, because I want to see it be as good as possible. And I am rooting for you guys to kill it in season 2. I did enjoy it. I liked the show. I think you did One Piece justice, so thank you. I would say the fact that this has managed to please not only fans but newcomers, I think that's a resounding success, and I am very, very happy to see that. I'm happy to see all the support for the series. I'm really, really hoping for a season 2, and I can't wait to see what's to come in the live action. I want to know what they change next, what they add, what they move around, and how we move on with the series going forward. So with that being said, thank you all for watching this review today. I hope you really enjoyed the video. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe to keep the music alive. And until next time, I hope you have a great day, a good night, and a wonderful romance dawn. Take care, guys.